for coming this evening. I'm stepping in for Caitlin, who usually is up here introducing, but she is at home in Canada right now, so you have me. For anybody who doesn't know me, I am the Global Mobility Manager here at CTC, so just have noticed recently a lot of interest around DAOs and foundations. So yeah, we connected with Ryón and Marc to come and chat to you guys about it. So I'm going to hand over to the experts who will talk to you all about kind of, decentralized governance and corporate structures. So enjoy. There you go.
Cool. Thank you very much, Izzy. And this is a great crowd, I have to say. It's standing room only. There's people standing outside as well, and all here for Ryón. So hopefully you'll make him look good.
I don't know that.
So I'm Marc Piano. Last time I did this event, I was Councillor Harney's. I've now moved across to Horizons Global. And just a quick shout out to Cayman Enterprise City. We've moved into Signal House, been here for a while now. And even though we can work remotely, I'm basically here 5 days a week. It's really easy to get to, really good facilities. And without being too bold to claim, some of the best coffee on the island in the canteen over there. Some might agree, some might disagree, but still pretty good. So we're going to talk tonight about DAOs, and you might have seen quite a few events on the island around DAOs in the last few months. There's a very good reason for that. It is by far one of the most interesting areas of law, of business, of organization and use of technology, but also for Cayman, it is one of the fastest growing sectors. Everyone in this room, directly or indirectly, in a lot of cases, is involved in this space in some way, and it's continuing to grow. The demand is high, and there's many reasons for that, and we'll go into that during the course of this discussion. We are live streaming as well, so people who can't make it tonight can watch it live or watch it when it's recorded. Back in 2016, when I used to do these presentations, I'd have to explain what a Bitcoin was, what a blockchain is. Luckily, we don't have to do that anymore, but I'm going to very quickly give a DAO 101, just so we can kind of set the tone here. Pretty much everyone here is sophisticated anyway, but it's always good to just do a bit of a recap. So effectively, a DAO is a way for humans to organize using technology. And that may be a surprising definition for some people in the room, but it's fundamentally what's going on here. And they're using blockchain technology and tokens and other methods of recording membership and voting and participating to allow people to make decisions, organize, and have control over certain things. But what's really cool about this new form of human organization is it allows people to control financial protocols, communities, assets, projects, dreams, ambitions, roadmaps. And so as we have seen this space evolve, and it all started back in 2016 with the DAO, which was created by Slockit, which unfortunately got hacked, we've seen the use of governance in blockchain projects increase. As a result of the amount of assets held in these projects and the control that the token holders may have over these projects, governance is becoming an increasing issue from a legal perspective, regulatory, tax, practical, security, human dynamics point of view. And so it becomes very complex very quickly. Everyone in this room and a lot of other service providers are involved in some way in making sure these governance mechanisms work, that they're efficient, that they're accountable. As a lawyer, I was involved in helping with some of the legal structuring around this. And we're going to talk about that and why that's important as well. But wanted to give a kind of a quick understanding and a 101 of what this stuff is, and we can take the conversation from there. So at Horizons Global, I work with Mike Robinson and Marc Mugglestone and Sandra, and we offer consultancy services and directorships. Marc and I at one point were competitors in law. He was at OJ, I was at Harney's. And we've brought our years of experience as lawyers to bear with projects. We help them structure from day one, Cayman, BVI, Panama, Switzerland, wherever. And we work with onshore counsel in the US, UK, and elsewhere, and help projects get from where they need to get to where they want to be. So that's a quick introduction to me. Some of you know me already, but I've been doing this since about 2016, doing a lot of policy and advocacy work in the UK as well. I wrote the Law Society's Legal and Regulatory Guidance Report on blockchain, spoke to the English Parliament, helped to present training to regulators, written law, helped to write laws, a whole bunch of other stuff. And I've got a whole bunch of podcasts, piano lessons, and a whole bunch of other things. So that's enough about me. Some of you have met Ryón before or have heard of him, but Ryón, if you maybe like to give an introduction to yourself, that'd be great.
Sure, thanks, Marc. So I've spoken in the Cayman Islands many a time, so I do know many in the room, and thanks for those coming again to hear me come speak. I run a pretty well-known law firm in the US called Horizons Law, similar name to Horizons Global.
Independent.
Yes. Horizons Global is staunchly independent. But was shared same ideals and came together doing some stuff with Mike. But yeah, Horizons Global has absolutely full independence. We have, at the firm side, we have been in this space since 2016. I went all in the space around that time. The firm has continued to grow. We work with many projects across many chains. Notables from Solana, I think, is my biggest claim to fame. Older crypto people will also know my Ether wallet, which is where I sort of got my start. We do everything on the US side, from fundraising to structuring to collaborating with on offshore providers, fiduciary work, or working with fiduciaries, working with other law firms, working with service providers on island. And I think at present, we've probably sent almost 300, 250-ish area worth of projects to the Cayman Islands. So very bullish on this jurisdiction, and very bullish on what the Cayman Islands has built, continues to build, which, in short, is just the proper rails for these protocols to spin up a foundation over here, hopefully bring it to $1 billion valuation or whatever, right? It's not really the size, but really the fact that the Cayman Island can do all these things. So yeah, that's it.
What was your claim to fame at Solana?
I was their general counsel. I was their Genesis general counsel.
Just wanted to get that on the record.
Trademarked.
So disclaimer that has to be said, as we go through this discussion, nothing we're saying is representing actionable legal advice or financial advice. Every project's different. We used to have a problem with projects wanting to do X, Y, Z, but better, or do whatever X, Y, Z did. But every project's got their own risk requirements, their own commercial requirements, and their own advisors and project aims. So they need to make sure they speak to the right advisors. One of the good things about Cayman is it's got some very, very sophisticated and smart service providers across the spectrum of services these projects require. And it's another reason why Cayman is one of the leading jurisdictions in this space. So I suppose to start with, I mean, you kind of preempted the first thing to discuss of the state of play in Cayman. There's just so much work coming in. There's projects from all around the world, not just in the US, but elsewhere. Why do you think Cayman is such an attractive jurisdiction for this sort of work from your side?
Yeah, sure. So maybe to give a little more background, when I first was working in the space, when we first started out, anything offshore, we do some things in Cayman. I've done some things in Seychelles, Singapore, not Mauritius. I'm trying to remember. There was a couple other like just weird one-off jurisdictions. Cyprus. We've tried a lot of these other jurisdictions. I think without a doubt, like as far as, again, projects being able to set up over here, set up a bank account, get proper service providers, do things on the foundation side that aren't on the lab side. I don't really think there's another jurisdiction that has been able to do it as well as Cayman. That's on the practical side. On the legal side, I think there's like great having proper separation, right, in the Cayman Islands versus the US runs to decentralization, lower risk of something being deemed a security, even though we don't have any like proper regulatory clarity yet. And I think even at like a high level, just like as a tax exempt jurisdiction, right, not having taxes in the Cayman Islands makes it ideal for foundations, which, participants in any of these protocols usually are worldwide. So, having a zero tax jurisdiction just makes complete sense, in my opinion. And I think most of the space would agree.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. And we're seeing an analogy with the funds space, which emerged over the last 40 years or so, where having a offshore financial center as the core for, say, the master fund, or in this case, the token issuer, in a tax-neutral jurisdiction is a sensible play because it's a worldwide business. And then the tax is borne in the relevant jurisdictions in which the token holders are based or the stakeholders. But you've mentioned separation several times there. Why is it so important? Why can't we just do everything through the US?
Well, I mean, practically speaking, I think setting up some foundation that is giving, tokens or something of value to people in the US as well as other jurisdictions creates just a litany of problems. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's just on the tax side. On the security side, obviously, nobody feels very comfortable setting up in a jurisdiction where, we do or don't know. They might come knocking at your door, depending on who's in the administration, right? Like who's running the SEC, who's like what the popular narrative is as far as the presidential debate, which at least I'm happy crypto's gotten a little bit of headway, in that respect. But there's still no answers. So, I mean, in short, like there's just lack of clarity.
Yeah, some of the regulators are a bit like a bit of an eye of Sauron, just surveying the entire landscape around them. So separation, I think you've got a story about this. Got some Mad Libs to put in. So you've got a story about the importance of separation, which I think is quite illustrative of the importance of this jurisdiction, not just for putting a structure in and kind of just running stuff through it, but actually having some substance to that structure. And maybe you could retell that story.
Sure, yeah. So I have a client. We inherited this client from another U.S. law firm, pretty well-known U.S. law firm. Let's just leave names out of this entire story, but unfortunately caught a regulatory inquiry and spoke to the regulator, came up with basically we were going to settle and shut down the protocol. Okay, great. We still suggested that we come in for some voluntary testimony because we're working on the settlement to try to make it like a pretty good settlement price for the project, especially when they're agreeing to basically shut down the protocol, unfortunately. Everything was going well as far as disclosure, getting in front of the regulator, doing a bit of this, again, voluntary testimony. The trickiest part of the testimony from the client wasn't the tech stack, wasn't what they did with the tokens, it wasn't the VCs, the investment, anything. It was the on and offshore piece. Okay. When they started questioning the client about the structuring piece, they asked some questions. For example, they said, hey, we see your director here is XYZ. Have you ever spoken to Director XYZ, right? Or let's just call the director Bob. Okay, have you ever spoken to Director Bob? No. Have any of the agreements or any things that ran commercial contracts that came from Foundation, did Bob ever have a question about them? At all, anything? Did he just sign them? Yes. Did he ever ask anything? No. Can you, in fact, tell me that Bob is a man? And the client said, no, and we relied on counsel for setup. And again, this wasn't our setup. We inherited, their full structure. And it was probably the trickiest piece of the testimony. And in my opinion, the part that didn't go over in the best way. So, what was the signal to me there was what the Cayman Island is doing with making sure you do have independent directors, right? Instead of having just basically this facade that is just, something that I think people in the space still, there's still a little bit of, I think, misunderstanding on what this really is. But it is an arm's length relationship. You do want this to be decentralized. You do want to have a foundation that's doing things that support the protocol. Labs can continue to do that, right? But, they're not the same thing. And unfortunately, there was some uncomfortable testimony there. We got through it, but it really was just a really high value signal that the work that's being done over here is meaningful, important, and should continue to, be a sign of, frankly, maturation in this space.
Yeah, and very poignant lesson there in the importance of having proper setup service providers and that level of oversight and governance on these structures. But how does that work in practice? Because these structures don't come into existence by themselves. As founders, they had the genesis of the project. They obviously want to have some upside in this. But by creating a foundation company, which, for the benefit of people watching from abroad, is a legal entity which doesn't necessarily need to have any members. So it has a director, it has a supervisor who exercises the voting rights in the absence of a member. They're typically the beneficial owner, although there can be others depending on the roles of different stakeholders in the foundation. And you have a secretary, which is a statutory requirement, and they have to have a SEMA license. But this is a legal entity which can only act for its own purposes, which are set out in its Articles of Association or Memorandum of Association. So the founders, if they're not directors or if they're not supervisors or not members, they've got no control over this foundation. They might have a service agreement as an onshore development company. That's kind of like the grout that holds the whole thing together. But they're not the people who are able to control what the foundation does. They may have influence, they may advise. How do you have that difficult conversation with founders? They have to give up control over key elements of this protocol that they created.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think most founders in the space, when they have an idea, they're getting ready to raise capital, right? They come to us on the US side. They're aware of some of these principles, right? Principles of decentralization. Decentralization means, among other things, that giving over of control, right? So I think in the beginning, it's always a little bit of an interesting dance between the firm and the founders, where it's like, hey, okay, we're going to raise into labs, say it's a safe and token warrant. Token warrant will be fulfilled by this offshore structure, which is usually Cayman BVI sub, right? You can go into structure and a little bit later if you want to, but back to your question, we'll sit down with the founders and we're like, hey, this thing is going to be completely separate. And it is always a little bit like, yeah, we get it. Maybe it's a wink and a nod, and then we always want to like double click on that and say, no, actually, this is really how this is going to happen. As these things get spun up, you'll have a services agreement. The entire thing will be arm's length. In short, they get more comfortable with it as things progress, right? Because they'll raise into their Delaware C Corp. They'll use some of that raised capital to structure offshore. Initially they'll earmark some funds or some assets that'll go to the offshore vehicle. Obviously, some of the tokens that, when they're generated through BVI, will run to the Cayman Foundation. That'll be held in Foundation Treasury. Majority will go on chain to say on-chain protocol treasury. They are comfortable at least with this protocol on-chain treasury. They go, well, at least there's some control there, right? However, you have to have different people on the multi-sig, on the DAO, the protocol side treasury. You can't have too many US people on the foundation side, multi-sig, or it could be a controlled foreign corporation or have some sort of tax issues. As we go through this structuring, it's a little bit, I think, painful for founders. They ultimately get it, and they know, like, hey, once this thing is set up, how they see how decisions and activities flow between labs and foundation pursuant to these agreements. Once it all starts to flow a little bit and it's set up and there's, we get past that initial friction, I think it starts to click. So
yeah, that makes sense. And obviously you're not tax lawyers or not tax counsel, but yes, do you see people focusing more on the securities bit, trying to avoid sort of SEC or CFTC oversight and focusing less on the tax piece? Is that potentially a dangerous path?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a minefield of things that we have to, work with founders on. And yes, definitely not a tax lawyer qualified to give tax advice, just for those at home. But I think if you're going to be working in crypto, if you're going to be in this space, you need to have a handle on securities laws, which is what we're experts in, corporate law, on and offshore structuring, tax, some employee matters, international employee matters, right? It's definitely a mixed bag that you have to kind of understand the whole picture in order to get the proper advice.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think you've got one of your guys in the audience here today, Michael Cairo. So maybe we can just run the mic over to Michael. Just curious from your point of view, Michael, because you're...
Hard questions, Mark, hard questions.
You're a relatively junior lawyer at the moment, obviously doing really good work, but you're at the coalface more so than maybe some of the senior lawyers are these days, having those initial conversations. What's the life cycle like? Like when these clients come to you, where are they at? What sort of conversations do you have with them? What are their main concerns? And at what point do you sort of send them to offshore to have those discussions about the next steps?
I think when they usually come to us, our bread and butter is sort of, the group of mid-20s guys and girls, whoever, who have an idea in a white paper and they want to raise, $5 million and launch the project. That's where we get a good amount of our clients that they come in at that stage. Some more sophisticated post-Series A with some complex offshore structuring stuff. The RWA clients, for example, can be a little bit more complicated, real-world assets, some other funds and stuff. But primarily, it's those early-stage founders. And so when they come in, the first priority is raising because, of course, the cost of doing business is pretty high, especially with international jurisdictions and compliance and legal advice and everything. So they'll come in at that stage. We'll help them get set up through the raise, like Ryón said. And then from there, the sequencing is, okay, entities set up, proper agreements in place for personnel, making sure IP is in the right place to the extent that IP can be put in the United States. Maybe there's some regulatory issues that would cause us to look at a different jurisdiction for things like derivatives and things that are a little bit more tricky. We'll sort of customize a structure that meets their needs there. Importantly, when they do the raise, you want to make sure that they can get that the team members can get their equity and their tokens allocated to them prior to the raise for tax purposes. Again, not qualified as a tax attorney here, so but we'll make sure that they get their 83Bs filed on time for US folks and make sure that they don't get hit with the full fair market value of the tokens and equity as they vest over time, but rather they can pay tax on the nominal amount up front, making sure that they understand the offshore, proper lockups, making sure that their lockups align with that of their investors moving forward, making sure that everybody in the team understands it. Yep. Making sure that when they do their fundraise, that their investors are accredited, if they're U.S. investors, otherwise foreign investors, and just making sure that they're doing their fundraise properly and not just taking money from anybody and everybody in the world. KYC, AML. That's the general gambit there.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Michael. And we're covering a lot, and we're only 20 minutes in so far.
Can I just ask Kyra, what has been the most challenging client or example of a tricky situation we've dealt with at the firm level, with on offshore, anything in your experience? Less than 90-second response.
That's a way to put him on the spot.
We recently we had a client come to us that said, "Hey, we want to make an exchange." And we're like, "Okay, exchange, very highly regulated entity." And so we dug in under the hood and got to know the tech a lot more. And as we were sort of digging into it and figuring out where do users' funds actually go, how much control do you have from the tech side? And as we dug into it, we said, guys, it's actually this is more like an unhosted wallet. And so in that case, the regulatory requirements are much different fundamentally, because you're not dealing with custody and the kind of sort of regulatory environment that's conducive to making sure that the team can't run off with their assets and those kinds of things. And so I think that's sort of our secret sauce. We're able to really dig in deeply on the tech. And so the founders themselves had this one idea of what they were. And then as we looked at it, we said, you actually fit into a much different box that gives you a lot more options to operate in. So it was difficult, but it was pretty rewarding and pretty cool.
Thanks, Kyle. Yeah, and the one thing I'd also like to say was really just awesome about this story that Michael Kyra brings up is, again, we're experts in some of these things, securities, corporate. We understand CFTC, the CA, commodities, right? Commodities Exchange Act, but we're not CFTC experts. We did this analysis. We spent a bunch of time building this position paper, and we hired an expert. And the expert gave us nothing, no material red lines, and was extremely impressed with what we put together. And this isn't like a pat on the back, but rather just I think proofs in the pudding, as far as if you put in the work and try to think hard about it, there are solutions here. And I do think that that's what makes our firm and the service providers and other participants we interact with so special and valuable.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Ryón. And we've seen this space evolve and the relationships between different stakeholders evolve, even in the last 2-3 years. A few years ago, you'd have a foundation set up, and the labs entity would basically do everything. They'd almost run the entire structure. They do all the grant administration themselves. They would liaise with service providers. They'd engage market makers. Is that, one, a good use of the founding team's resources? And two, from an onshore perspective, what in an ideal world should the labs team be doing vis-a-vis the foundation, and what should they definitely not be doing?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it's actually a pretty simple answer. In a perfect world, labs should focus on, the initial V1 or V0 of the protocol, right? Which is then, turned over or open source. They should continue to develop and contribute as almost like a core contributor to that protocol. Everything else that isn't related to building this project should be handled by foundation. So, commercial relationships with market makers, centralized exchange listings, grants, management and administration, anything that isn't really what's core to the tech and continue to develop, I think should run to foundation. And, in addition, I think one of the interesting things that we've seen in the space is labs. It used to be labs and foundation. And we'd always recommend, for decentralization reasons, for, showing proper separation of church and state, and just control, is having other sort of like second labs, let's say, or other people that would, contribute, be core contributors to the protocol. We've seen a little bit more of that, as of late, which again, I think speaks to a sign of maturation in the space.
I think it's also worth zooming back out again. Once these foundations are incorporated and they have a professional independent director, it's effectively got no capitalization. It's got a service agreement with labs, which is somewhat limited in scope. We as directors, and there's quite a few of us in this room, we're not waking up one morning going, I've had a great idea for this protocol, really good idea. I'm going to engage a whole bunch of KOLs, and I'm just going to use foundation assets, and we're going to pay them, and then we're going to engage the other market makers, and we're going to do a grant program to my best mate over in France. We're not doing that. We don't want to do that. And frankly, it's not our job, and we wouldn't know how best to do that. So we're relying on other service providers to do the operations, to do the lift, to give the advice, and frankly, to do the marketing, the promotion, all the things on a day-to-day basis that the foundation will do. But how important is that from an onshore perspective to demonstrate that actually this is a foundation that stands on its own 2 feet?
I think it's critically important. we always tell founders, our clients, when they look under the hood and the rubber hits the road, right? If you respect the form, then you can avail yourself of what we've set up as far as defensibility, right? Respect the form, they should respect the form. And I think we've seen that in, a few other instances when we had sort of an inquiry or some sort of like issue, when in fact it is respected top to bottom and you're doing the right thing and you are turning over control to foundation, to others, to whoever, right, is sort of the next step. Doing that hard thing each time, and it is in fact a hard thing, and it is in fact very uncomfortable for some of these projects and founders. Once they get to the other side, they all like sort of get it, not to be like vague or ambiguous, but it's just like you go through each one of these steps. This entire sort of structure and situation is very different than anything else that's in, traditional tech or finance or anything. So, I mean, it's a very interesting and exciting place to work.
There's form and substance, right? It's not just the form, it's also the engagement of the service provider, and they're being engaged and paid by the foundation out of its own assets. That's important as well.
Yeah, agree.
So we're sort of slowly meandering through the life cycle of these projects. We've kind of got the initial bit set up. We've got our service providers engaged. We've got counsel on onshore and offshore. We've got our service providers ready, and we've done TGE. Now we get to the trickier part, which is the governance element and the relationship between the governance token holders, their system for organizing and decision-making, and the offshore structure. What does that typically look like? Because I know I've seen Horizon's Law decentralization roadmaps before. How do you map that out with a project? And it goes from they've given up control or they're going to give up control, but now it's not just that. They're now going to give over control to a whole bunch of random people who they're not even going to know from time to time. And they're going to have significant control over potentially what the protocol does, whether or not that's in the foundation, over potentially what the foundation can do with its assets, depending on the relationship between the foundation and governance. What are some of the key considerations and risks from your side, from your experience working for the clients, that need to be addressed there?
Sure, yeah. I think it's a slow burn. I mean, it really depends on the project, right? And what, in fact, they are giving over. This is, I think, we're a little bit, not really a friction point, but a very critical point, and one that we need to always emphasize with our clients, which is, hey, this is about giving over control. But it's not about like, hey, we got to give over control like that. My hands are off. Well, who would do that? Founders won't do that. You can blow up the protocol. You can really cause some, terrible material damage. So instead, it's a slow sort of structuring process. TGE is out, right? That's where we're at in the process. So the token is out. There's likely some sort of loose governance framework. They probably have, some sort of improvement plan in governance. It'll be, I don't know, everybody should know, like EIPs or Ethereum improvement plans, or EIPs. They typically will take the same sort of format, right? So if it was Marc's protocol, it'd be MIPs, or Marc improvement plans, which I can think of none at present because they're perfect. But so, we'll have these EIPs and or these improvement plans as they go through. They're iterating. Those usually can be handled either by token holder governance. We're seeing more of these committees, sort of like top line, like an executive type committee, subcommittees that'll handle grants, other sort of activities. In my opinion, again, there's no certainty here, but I think if there was a hallmark of true decentralization, it would be giving up of the upgrade keys or upgrade authority. That means that you've given over the keys to actually change, the functions and, features of a smart contract such that like you could, take control of this protocol. Like that's not usually given over to one person ever. It's usually a multi-sig and upgrade authority to be like 5 of 7, meaning like you need 5 of the 7 signers to agree. That process I think is multi-year. And again, it really depends on like what they're doing.
What typically do you see the role of the foundation and the offshore structure in terms of supporting the governance of the project after TGE?
Sure, I will see a lot on the foundation side as far as giving out grants, making sure those grants are properly administered and given out, meaning KYC. Who are these people? Like, there's no sanctions or other issues with them. We see a lot on the foundation side dealing with market making. Other sort of I've seen some interesting loan arrangements. I mean, I think what foundation does now, at that point is to make sure they continue to sustain the protocol as far as the token, giving out grants, and other sort of related marketing activities.
I think you make a good point on the KYC, and it's everyone's favorite topic, particularly on the founder side and the protocol side. But some of you may have seen the story that came out today on Twitter, ZachXBT posting about these developers who have been engaged by a bunch of different projects. They'd used fake IDs, fake KYC, and they turned out to be from North Korea. And they ended up actually stealing funds from some of these protocols that they were engaged to help build. And even though sometimes the AML laws may not strictly apply, as a matter of good governance, if you're a director of a foundation or in charge of a labs company, if you're going to be engaging these people for significant work on a protocol or giving out significant value, you've got to know who they are. And it doesn't necessarily mean you KYC someone for a $5,000 grant because you've got to take a risk-based approach, but for significant value being given away or engaging people for significant contributions to a foundation or on the lab side to a protocol, we're in a world now where people do this. So it's not about going against the ethos of decentralization. It's simply a protection measure to know who you're dealing with, having an identifiable counterparty. If they're going to play a critical role, perhaps doing KYC, even if it's just for development work or other functions supporting the project. So I think this is going to become an increasing issue over the coming years, particularly as you can now generate fake IDs using AI and generate fake data using AI. So the risks increase, and it's not just security audits on the protocol itself, it's the human element, which has always been the weakest link and always will be. And DAOs are meant to ideally automate some of that and allow some transparency and some protection against that, but it's the stuff on the periphery that presents the increased risk. So with all of that in mind, we now have effectively a form of governance over whatever this thing is. It may not be a DeFi protocol, it may be a gaming project, it may be a SocialFi project, maybe some sort of AI-related project. How then do you balance herding cats, which could be the case if every token holder can have a say and have a vote, with effective governance and administration? And how do you balance that with then potentially putting some sort of management or representation layer in the firing line, either as beneficial owners of a foundation, depending on the control they may have, or having some sort of attack vector from regulators or tax authorities? Probably a bit unfair to phrase a question like that, but how do you thread that needle?
I mean, well, transparently, I think we work, and rely on whoever our offshore counsel is on some of these, at least on the foundation side. U.S. side, it is very tricky. I think these projects, there's similar flavors, right? Governance is a typical feature in blockchain, technology and protocols as far as managing. But they could be a GameFi, they could be SocialFi, it could be some interesting NFT project that also is related to a token. What makes crypto, in my opinion, so interesting outside of its, I think, world-changing technology is the interesting use cases that you might have some new technological innovation on this chain over here, and you'll see it like very quickly be integrated if it's interesting at all and has any sort of value capture, and not just like economic value capture, like, reduction of friction in governance or, increasing community engagement, whatever. We almost never get the same thing twice. We have this like strong framework in which we use to sort of, to your point, lead a project from start to finish, or I guess they never finish, but past TGE and beyond, it's a very well-known and mature project. But the issues never stop. They could change in complexity as a project gets more mature. We've seen some interesting, we've seen and been involved with at least one token merger. How do you do that?
DAO M&A?
It's a little bit of DAO M&A, yeah. So, I think the answer is you have to be really thoughtful. You have to look at what these projects are doing, what's important, where do the flows go? Where is the revenue being generated? Are there other issues that come up as that protocol upgrades to V2, V3 and beyond? It's really, I don't know if playground is the right word, but it is very much a playground for those that are trying to figure out how to solve hard problems. And I mean, frankly, that's how I look at it, right? It's just you get to solve puzzles every day.
I completely agree with that. And given the speed at which this space is evolving, what worked 18 months ago for one project may be completely inappropriate for a project now. And if you look at what's happening now with chain abstraction methodology coming through. That's mind-blowing, but it also requires you to understand what's going on and then look at the structuring. Is that appropriate? Right. Is it a simple Cayman BVI structure, or do we need to look at other stuff? Layer 2 is a different set of considerations versus layer 1s. So each project needs its own detailed analysis and attention. But once you've got governance done, is it like set and forget and you step back and like check in about a year or two, or is there more of a continuous relationship going forward? I mean, what in reality is that it's a way to go there?
Yeah, I mean, I guess as far as our role as a project becomes, larger and more well-known, we will see more things happening at the foundation side. Foundations start to hire their own team instead of relying on just strictly service providers. So they'll have some boots on the ground here. We will keep a relationship with labs. We will sometimes get, brought back in even where it's foundation side and they have their own, local Cayman council to handle interesting commercial relationships, or again, some merger maybe on the lab side. Why would you do that, right? The sort of sophistication on some of these activities as they relate to labs, foundation, or both, it's truly just very interesting. We've seen also, I'm sure you've seen this a lot on the Cayman side, where you have foundation, then you might get one or two other structures, one that's an ecosystem fund, or one is like, some other interesting like token play, right?
Or they want to launch a new project and try and jam it into the existing structure. Maybe they need a new one. What do you see as the key risks at the moment? We've touched on some of them, but overall from an offshore perspective and an onshore perspective.
Giving over proper control. Having the proper structure set up so both client feels comfortable, is well informed, and it's also set up in such a way that like they can again be afforded that protection. Proper securities concerns as far as like the raise and at least investors tokens, that they're properly locked up, such as it meets some sort of exemption under the Securities Exchange Act. There are lots of, it says probably 10 times already. There's lots of tax issues. And I also think, like, again, a sign of just where these new issues keep coming up in the space. We've been spending a lot of time working with like tax counsel and seeing, for example, safe and token warrants, those that work in the space and invest in the space. You get equity from your safe. You have a simple agreement for future equity. For those that don't know, that's a safe, right? And then this sort of secondary agreement, which is a token warrant. Token warrant, is fulfilled offshore. If you have a direct nexus between, again, I'm not a tax lawyer, but this is what I was told, a direct nexus between your equity rights that run to your token rights, your labs co or your foundation, all those activities now are, it's a control foreign corporation, or it's effectively connected income, PFIC. I mean, all these things come up. So tax is always a large concern. We force founders to get in front of tax counsel or tax service providers as soon as possible. Securities, proper corporate structuring. We see some interesting founder disputes, or like quasi-founder disputes, like a friend that came in and, didn't do anything, but his good buddy let him sign all the docs and he left, and now he's come back that the project's about to launch, and he's like, I need 10% of this protocol.
Seems fair.
Yeah. So, I mean, it really is, I think those are some of the highlighted like grave concerns. I mean, what do you guys see, Marc, as far as your side?
I think on the Cayman side, the main risks, well, there's several buckets of risk. I think sanctions breach risk, that's a key thing, particularly when it comes to grant programs or making payments out, or receiving in proceeds from an LP, which has been deployed either by someone else or that a structure is paid into, getting that in and then suddenly realizing there's been no sanctions checks on anyone using that LP. So you have no idea if those proceeds going into sanctions or proceeds of crime or not. So that kind of knocks out the use of LPs in some cases, unless they're permissioned. Other risks include the wrong entity entering into agreements, which then could put them in breach of law or regulation, which is very important because we want to make sure we're fully compliant with all laws and regulations in Cayman and the BVI. Other risks could include the labs co overstepping the bounds of their service agreements, and even those carefully structured. So any consultation with the foundation is advisory only, them effectively making the decisions anyway. And that oversteps not just the terms of the service agreement, but then potentially puts the labs co or the founders in regulatory hot water, tax hot water.
What, can you give, just for everybody here, what's an example of, in good faith, overstepping the bounds, labs or founders overstepping the bounds of a services agreement, that runs foundation.
Sure, they mint the token.
Fair.
Yeah, or they have control over the multi-sig and have some sort of override authority, and they go and exercise that, or they effectively have control over the protocol beyond just providing technical development. And actually, that was either not covered, or they just didn't think that that was a relevant point to consider, which is also down to the right service providers at the right time asking the right questions. Other risks would include using the wrong service providers. So service providers who are being engaged to provide services that aren't required. And that's an important decision for the directors and for the labs company to make sure the scope's being done properly. But also, again, then potential overlap and control of the service provider by the labs company beyond the bounds of mere advice. So there's a lot of careful considerations that need to be done there as well. Because if someone looks at what's going on here and brings up the records of communications and really it's the founders running the whole thing, and
That's a problem.
yeah, that's a massive problem. So the directors do have to take an active role.
And also, I think for everybody's information, and I'm sure this is pretty well understood, a lot of these founders, this isn't some, grizzled Wall Street or, traditional company exec. Like, these are usually very sharp, younger founders, and this might be their first venture, into being an entrepreneur. So I think that sometimes, at least with my team, I always try to make sure that's appreciated, because to your point, Marc, sometimes they'll think they want something, but we have to say, no, that doesn't, who cares? Yeah, I know your friend's doing that, but that's, you're a lending protocol. This is not that. You're a DEX aggregator. Fine. Right. Bad example, but that happens all the time. Or, you'll have founders, in good faith, aren't trying to hide anything. They just don't know that they should tell you these things, or if you don't ask those questions, it could become a problem later on. So,
that's why it's particularly important for experienced Cayman BVI counsel to be involved as early as possible and asking the right questions.
I agree, and I do think that's where having a strong director, really, the role can solve a lot of issues before they become a problem. Yeah,
agreed. And I think this is, again, going back to the wider point of why Cayman is so successful in this space, and we've touched on this several times already. It is the strength of the service provider community. You have people who have got very established businesses who are serving the fund space and still serve the fund space, but you had the people who built this out here and active already in the financial services sector. And then as this technology and as the use of Cayman Foundation companies has become much more popular in Cayman, you have that level of experience in the financial services sector, traditional governance, risk and compliance, all the other key areas covered, then being turned and applied to this space. And so you have a level of sophistication and maturity here that I think is hard to beat in most other jurisdictions. I'm sure we may get comments disagreeing. Nonetheless, I think it's a very strong draw, and it does mean that the service providers are taking on a lot of responsibility, and they're being lent heavily on by the labs code, by the founding team, by the directors. But it's important that they are up to the challenge, and the level of expectation and excellence required is absolute, because all it takes is one project to stumble, and that could have a chain reaction within the project, that could have reputational impacts for the jurisdiction. So it's incumbent on all the service providers to make sure they are up to speed, up to date.
And collateral damage to other protocols if, say, this is a large L1, right? Or some project with a ton of TVL that other projects are relying on. Right?
Yes, it's incredibly interlinked. And you also don't want to put people in a position where they're making decisions that might make the company insolvent or in breach of law or regulation. So there's a whole host of issues which are dynamic. An issue at the moment may not be an issue in 6 months' time, and vice versa. Being slightly more philosophical for a second, is decentralization realistically achievable? Or is it more of a pipe dream?
I think decentralization, after a few years, is absolutely achievable. I have the pleasure of working with several well-known projects on many chains, but this in particular is on Ethereum. I think is one of the first blue chip DeFi protocols, and we have been working with them for years. And we have been in governance conversations, disputes between other members in the community, between the councils. There's more than one council. We have seen it really work. We've seen the founder step away, maybe come back, do something else. Other core contributors that weren't as involved now step up and sort of lead to the next version of the protocol. I've seen it. I think it can happen. I think it's not a pipe dream. I wish we could have a little bit more clarity, even if it was in the US just saying, hey, when you give up upgrade authority, you are in fact decentralized. So I do think we can get there. Just philosophically, I think the friction of governance, of decentralized governments, will hopefully be lessened with some of these, interesting AI agents where, they're trusted, they're not a human, right? So that could take a little bit of this friction from this very international community and make it, move a little more faster.
And then we'll have AI agents able to control digital assets, which is a mind-blowing concept when you think about it.
Yeah.
Zooming out further though, given the complexity we've discussed and the risks, decentralization is really complex. If you're a founder, you have to give up control. You don't really get any direct upside. It kind of sucks. Why not just centralize the whole thing? What's the point of doing all this and the ethos of decentralization? What's it trying to achieve?
It's trying to achieve giving over some sort of purpose, control, at least on the governance level, of this protocol that runs to the token holders. It also makes sense, like for practical reasons, if you are a crypto founder, you might have to spend there's lots of carve outs here, but I have seen on more than one occasion, you can have a great founder come in, build a protocol, set up the proper structure, spend another, 2 or 3 years, and then be done and do their next thing. And then they can come back and still contribute, participate as the community takes it and continues to grow, that protocol. Like that to me is like very interesting. I think that's, obviously different than say a SaaS founder.
So they're not locked in for the period of their equity and their involvement in the project.
Correct.
That makes sense.
They might have VC restrictions, but typically after 4 years, they can probably be free to do, whatever, if they want to move to the next thing.
So as we start to move towards the last part of this session and zooming out even further, getting even more philosophical, is the original kind of libertarian idea that decentralization and decentralized governance means that people can all have a stake in and own and control the financial services infrastructure of the future, is that still a motivation, or is that kind of now given way to the practicalities of building and launching and deploying and operating these projects?
I think some of the original principles of digital assets and cryptocurrency, as far as being a self-sovereign, as far as being able to control your assets and these things which are important to you that nobody should tell you what to do with, I still think they're very much there. I do always sit back and just sort of marvel at how these, OG, like early entrants into the space still hang on to that. I still hang on to that, but also how it's changed. And you get these new flavors of entrance into the space. In 2021, I honestly thought it was a little crazy because you'd have all of these just, younger people that saw NFT plays as like quick money. We can see that right now with like Pump Fun. Some people use and look at crypto as a fast buck. And I wish all those people would leave the space. There are others that see this as truly the technology for what it is, which is, again, I think a massive change to the world as we know it, and it'll be more and more clear day by day. I think the newer entrants, it's not like newer entrants don't have this old philosophy. I see a lot of it, right, at present. And I think when we've gone through, post FTX, when nobody was interested, in crypto at that time, it's the same song as the cycle before, right? Every time there's a blow up, it's like the real core people that were here, that were there back then, that were there during that time, and now that are here. That is what, in my opinion, that is the central group of participants in this space. And I do think that they'll have a pretty aligned philosophy.
And they've been here for a long time, and they'll continue to be so. I think we're getting from A to B, but it's not necessarily a direct straight line. You have to go through a lot of zigzags. You have to go back a few steps, go forward again, completely messing up those prepositions of movement for the purpose of that analogy. But everyone has to go through this, and some of these projects have to be tried. Some of these new ways of doing things have to be floated, and if they fail, that's fine. At least they were tried. I think there's a lot of very, very smart people in this space. I think there's a lot of potential for doing things in new ways that haven't been done before, and that's why it's quite cool to be a service provider in this space, being at the cutting edge, because we're seeing very smart people who see the world differently, trying something new, taking a risk. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But then as these things start to take traction, they gain more adoption. We get more large investments coming in. We get institutional players looking to adopt it and use it for their own purposes. And slowly and iteratively, we'll start to see more benefits of this technology brought to bear. We're still nowhere near there yet. Still early days, I think. But we'll get to the point where this technology is so embedded in day-to-day life that we don't even care that it's a technology itself. We care what we can do with it. We care how we can use it. Is it easy to use? Is it simple? Is it safe? Is it secure? And as we eke slowly closer towards that, I think that's going to make this much more palatable to mainstream, because it's still quite esoteric and stratospheric in some respects. But there's people now very aware of that and trying to get there. And as the infrastructure becomes easier to use and more inextricable, then it becomes easier to build out on that and to integrate that in a much more user-friendly way. So as we now start to land this plane, what do you see lying ahead for the next 2, 3, 4 years, not just for Cayman, but for this space generally?
I'm hopeful that we'll start to have at least some soft idea of rules on the US side. I also think that we'll see other jurisdictions try to compete with the Cayman Islands. I mean, I think there's 2 real viable jurisdictions, right? Cayman BVI, say, as one, and then Switzerland as another. We can go into the differences another time, but we've seen other jurisdictions like the UAE try to get involved, Marshall Islands, like, I don't know, shipyard jurisdictions. Sorry.
What does Cayman have that these jurisdictions don't?
I think it's simple. The Cayman Islands, and I think I said it at the beginning, has the proper infrastructure to support these projects. Look, these are young founders. Crypto does move extremely fast. Like, as I said prior, you can have some interesting play on Avalanche, and that thing could be copied within a month into a protocol that's either a new project or, integrating it, let's say if it's like a feature, in less than, a handful of weeks, whatever. The speed of this space is insane. And, you have founders trying to move fast, taking this capital, launching this protocol from A to Z. In a very short period of time. You need to have the proper rails, especially where your foundation, where arguably the most valuable off-chain assets will be parked, right? You need to have all that in place. And when we have tried, we had a client that wanted to do something in UAE for various reasons. When we've tried these jurisdictions, 1, there's not an answer. 2, the single firm or service provider that has the answer is unavailable, and when we talk to them, kind of don't know what they're talking about, and also want to like rip our client's head off on fees, right? And then there's local laws or situations or issues that like aren't actually clearly communicated, where, for example, and I'm obviously not an expert in this jurisdictions, in the UAE, there's something where to have equity rights be enforceable, it has to be notarized and like given over to the government, some government office for them to sort of bless it before you actually have an equity right to enforce. So you could give me money for, and I give you some equity, but if you don't perfect it, you can have no recourse.
Yeah, notarized, apostilled, and legalized. It's a pain.
Love that.
Okay, and final 2 questions. So what would your message be to the Cayman Islands, service providers, government? What can they do more of to keep the work here, keep complying with law and regulation as it evolves at a dizzying pace, not just in Cayman, but elsewhere? What are we doing right, and what do we need to do more of?
Sure. I think the Cayman Islands has done a very good job of making itself available of being responsive to the needs of founders in the space. I was actually going to throw a little jab, but I do think all service providers, including firms, everybody else on island has gotten much faster with addressing issues or getting things done with respect to founders in the space, which again, on the US side, everything is due yesterday. Mm-hmm. Even new clients, they're like, hey, is this thing done yet? You haven't even signed an engagement agreement. I do think I've seen a real difference between when we were doing stuff in Cayman, say in 2018-19 versus now. Yeah. And that's been really interesting as far as what they can do better. I think having a few more maybe banking relationships on island, though I do think there are a handful that are available already, would be valuable. I don't know. What do you think, Marc?
I honestly think Caymanians need to really be aware of the opportunities in front of them. I self-taught myself all of this back in 2015. I think a lot of us in this room did, and we're still having to do that every day. I'm learning about chain abstractions now. But I think the opportunity for Caymanians in particular, whether it's in law, whether it's in accounting and finance, or even in the coding, tech, and development, I don't think outside of funds there's ever been an opportunity like this. And I don't know if there'll be one like this again. And it's on the Caymanians' doorstep. They need to take that opportunity, seize it. They can self-teach, and then they're in prime position for this.
That's and actually, not even to cut you off, but I was going to say that the one thing that I think the Cayman Islands could do better is education of what is over here and what is done. Because, and this is a true story, right? We're not Cayman Council, obviously. I teach my team. They go through with these founders. We give them a little rep, right? I call them reps. They have to give them at least 2 or 3 reps on what like offshore looks like, with all the qualifiers, right? So just to skip all that, they have to do this 2 or 3 times, because then when I do turn them over to say you or Mike to start to talk about offshore structuring, you know, they are aware of it. Again, these people are agreeing to have up this interesting project or protocol that could be worth billions of dollars, and with the understanding that as soon as possible, we're going to turn it all over to somebody else and a community. So, education has to start immediately. How can the Cayman Islands do a better job? I think you guys do a great job, and this is a prime example of that. But the Cayman Islands should contact me, a handful of you guys, and we should have a little conference or something here, right? Alternatively, if you guys want to go to another Caribbean island that has a ton of crypto people, where I'm located, Puerto Rico. If a couple of you wanted to go over there, I'm happy to set up a ton of meetings with a lot of my friends who are pretty well-known people in the space. So 2 options. Let me know.
Both very attractive in their own way. I just want to emphasize that message, especially for Caymanians, to just really kind of get to grips with this, seize this opportunity, and absolutely own it. Because all of us here, we're kind of generation 1, generation 2. If we want this work to continue, we need lots and lots of people coming through in all areas of this service provider space. And who better to do that than the people who, this is their island, this is their opportunity, and it has to be carried forward by Caymanians, I think. Ryón, we've covered a lot in a short amount of time, like we always do. Do you have any final thoughts or messages for the audience here, for the people watching online?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say I really appreciate all of the welcome and attention that you've given me, Marc, that everybody on island is always very kind and nice to me. I am happy to speak to any of you about any interesting, tricky issues, anything you want to talk about. I have seen a lot. Sometimes we don't have enough time to cover it all, but I've really appreciated the time spent here, and just want to say thanks. And I think you guys are doing a great job. What can be better is the question. So I'll give an answer, but I think the Cayman Islands has been great.
Fantastic, thank you. And before we wrap up and go into Q&A, I just want to again give a shout out to Cayman Enterprise City. Been speaking to a few people in Signal House here since I arrived, and all of them are consistent about the speed at which it is easy to get things set up here, to get work permits granted, and the hand-holding process throughout has just been very, very responsive, very, very helpful, and people are impressed at the speed. So Charlie and the CEC team, if you've got any questions about that, definitely speak to them. So that's the kind of the fireside chat, and now I thought we'd have a few minutes left to do any Q&A. And usually there's either no questions at all or a whole bunch. Okay, well, the latter's good. They're all going to be for you. So.
There we go.
I did try to promise myself I wouldn't talk today. However, speaking from personal experiences, you mentioned a little bit about communication process and protocols. The infrastructure, no matter how many corporations and foundations and structures you put in place, if the communication is caught up within that process, you bring all that down. So who teaches and guides, say, the founders, you say, or perhaps the leaders or the team, how that communication protocol actually needs to be established to not just destroy your whole foundation or your structures? Because really, the structures don't really matter if all of that is identified and seen as the group, say 3 or 4 or 5 or 10, are leading this process, whether it's the labs group, whether it's the foundation group, whether it's somebody else. How do you guys handle that? How do you support these groups to not just destroy your whole group program?
So I think the communication is really important, completely agree. And I think how that's handled, it will vary by stage. At the very beginning, it's going to primarily be onshore council communicating with offshore council and the service providers to get things set up. The founders will have a role in that as well, but it's making sure that everyone's aligned. There's group threads, there's cadence calls to that point of being set up. And then once it's set up, what is the relationship between the foundation and the proto-DAO, the council, the token holders itself? What are the agreed communication channels by which information is communicated? What informational reporting obligations there are? How are decisions of the directors conveyed, either formally through the governance channels or informally to service providers, to council and other people? And how do the service providers work together to ensure efficient communication, but also you're communicating with the right people, the right things at the right time? You don't need to have broadcast channels for absolutely everybody, because one, that may not be relevant, two, it may be sensitive, three, it may even be legally privileged. So I think there's a phased approach there. And then it's particularly once governance kicks in, there needs to be an agreed message or form by which directors can be receiving instructions and then act. We're all on multiple foundations. We're not sitting there refreshing Twitter every 5 minutes, waiting for a new post or refreshing Snapshot. We agree that as early as possible, prior to the governance launching. And then if that changes over time, then there's regular communication with service providers who often interface with the community and then interface back with council and the foundation. Ryón, from your perspective, I'm sure grateful for any additional thoughts.
No, I mean, I agree. I think it's well said.
I'll just add one more thing, because really, what companies have you ever seen, or businesses or protocols or systems or whatever you want to do, without having a leader who drives a business or a project or whatnot, right? Because ultimately, a director is still being guided and directed by somebody or a group. So the director aspect of it kind of falls short on the fact that you're not really participating. You're just following somebody else's guidance. At that point, there's still whoever it is that's guiding and directing and leading is still the, maybe not founder, but they're still the person who's in charge. You could call him a CEO, you could call him a COO, you could call him a founder, you can call him a leader, you can call him a director, whatever you want to call him. If they're found to be that communication tool, it's giving the direction to the directors. It all goes down.
Yeah, effectively control, right?
I mean, we say ultimately at foundation level, the buck stops with the director. So they are ultimately in control. They're the ones who have to discharge their duties to the foundation. They're the ones potentially on the hook if the foundation ends up in some sort of breach of law or regulation. So people can have arrangements by which they may advise or counsel or request that the director do something, but the director has to make that final decision. So there can be communication channels and methods of advice and agreement there, but that has to be established at the beginning. And I've not seen any project where that's failed because it's clear in advance. And I think where problems do arise is where a project goes off and does something, or service providers do things through the foundation, or the labs co may do something through the foundation, and they haven't told council or the directors. This is a very different set of circumstances to, say, more traditional financial structures where you set it up, you leave it, and then the operations people runs it. It's a much more hands-on process. It's much more collaborative and communicative. So I'd like to think that with the right service providers all lined up and engaging on a regular basis, that sort of thing either hopefully won't happen, or if it does, it could be quickly identified and remediated. But you're right, particularly where there's an on-chain element, those communication channels need to be very clearly defined and implemented and enforced effectively for that to work. And potentially, if that's not followed, it could even be a breach of the governance requirements, such that the director isn't even required and may even be unable to act on that communication if it's not done through the proper channels.
Yeah, and just one thing to add to that, I think I understand a little better what you were getting at now. Like, sure, if the labs or CEO just says, do this, and then foundation does that, I do think that the structure starts to fall apart. But that's not what and also just to back up, years prior, that's sort of what it was, right? Not in the Cayman Islands, not saying any jurisdiction, but in the beginning, this sort of like foundation was like, yeah, it's a foundation, but like, I'm the CEO, you guys are going to do what I say. What we see now, and what we see very early, and Marc and Mike and everybody else, Horizons Global, I think does an excellent job, just a shout out, is they do look under the hood, right? So that earlier story, like when they were in front of the regulator or client and they were just getting questioned and they couldn't even say whether or not the gender of their director, if they could confirm that was the proper, gender of the director. On the foundation side, asking the proper questions, founders always want it done yesterday. And it's just that process, slowing it down, in my opinion, does demonstrate not lack of ultimate control and more of a collaboration, right? And I think as you do more and more things together, there's some efficiency and speed as directors get comfortable with founder. We also see some foundations will have directors, but also have like a president of the foundation, right? Another person that also is responsible for this decision making. It's an iterative process. In the beginning, sure, I think there is a lot of direction coming from labs, but over time, especially over years, they become their own sort of separate things, which frankly, we've seen more than once, sometimes can be in conflict. Not like lawsuit conflict, but it's like, yeah, oh, we want foundation to, they got $1 billion. We want them to give 10 million to this thing. And foundation's like, no, we can't do that because of XYZ reasons. Even though labs is like, this is what we want right now, right? I've seen that numerous times, so.
We push back on a regular basis too.
I have a question there for you. You're talking about the corporate governance and the regulator, right? Asking about the gender of the client. What is the relevance of that? Is it because they want to prove that the person exists?
You wanted to prove that they never even spoke to
Never met the guys.
Yeah.
So they don't know.
And they did, yeah. And they were just making a point,
Okay.
right? This is decentralized. And it's like, oh, okay, they never talked to them,
You don't
never
know.
had a response. Yeah, do you even know if they are who they are? I mean, they could have said, is he a cat?
Yeah.
Right? You would have been like, I don't know.
Okay. Yeah,
Right?
that's what I assumed.
They were just sort of like emphasizing the point of how ridiculous it was in that situation.
And if you hold yourself out as a professional independent director, going back and saying I was just following orders is probably not going to cut it because you're being paid to exercise your duties towards the foundation.
Yeah, and I think it's a fine line too, because you don't want working with directors that just say, "Oh, we can't do this." No, stop. Sorry, I'm the director. I'm in control. This whole thing's gonna, can blow up. But you got to do this thing right now. I mean, it's very solution focused and doing the right thing.
Especially when it comes to strict liability offenses like sanctions breaches.
Like sanctions breaches.
As someone in the law side, do you see any opportunities on the tech side of Cayman? And I'll give you a couple of examples. I was just in New York talking with big founders that may even, I've worked with you. DAOs spent a stupid amount of money trying to have the proper infrastructure and hierarchy and distribution, decentralization. And then they messed it up because they hosted the main ICO website on AWS, which then brought them all the way to the US. So do you see anything that could be done, and even as a call to action for Cayman, but more on the tech side? Is there RPC stuff we can do so that you can access the LPs via specific RPC nodes here? Can we do offshore hosting? Is there more stuff that you think that would be?
Sequencers.
I'm 10 weeks out of law now, so I can't answer the question as phrased.
Nice. I guess it really depends. I think sequencers are a little bit of an issue, right? They're obviously centralized. I do think there's a lot of this Web 2 infra, like AWS, that is sort of a tricky issue because, whether the project's good or bad, it's a massive leverage point. And any sort of again, assuming the facts, there's been no bad faith or really harm or wrong done by the protocol, but they've gotten too big and they want to get looked at by a regulator. I think some of these things, there are solutions that are being worked on to handle some of them, but again, crypto moves so fast. There'll be something that when did Uniswap come out? 2018, 19? Before that, a DEX, nobody would have understood these things. Now it's sort of core primitive on any new L1. You have a DEX, you have lending, right? Borrowing. So where the space goes, I think there'll always be, new problems that arise, but crypto is so dynamic and nimble that there will absolutely be people that, try to solve those things. So
yeah, because this ends up being a thing. I work in tech, and thank you so much for actually kind of meeting us on the tech side. I love that you actually talk and walk that talk. We don't know what is necessary. I have my own company in Cayman. We actually do a lot of stuff for Web3 companies. But then the other day they were like, oh, you should actually be careful when you access Uniswap from a specific setting, because ideally that RPC should be offshore. And then I'm like, oof, can I productize that? Is this something that I can actually offer? Maybe even for free, right? To the ecosystem. And now I have an RPC here running, and we actually support the whole ecosystem. So it's always good to kind of have this conversation and know what we can do to make Cayman an even better turnkey solution for the system itself.
Yeah. And just and we'll get to somebody else, but I also think for people on the tech side, I think this technology is super interesting. I am always trying to learn something more and more each day. So I think a dialogue is important, right? And a little bit of willingness to be I think these might be the issues over there. Almost 99% of the time, we have to identify the issues, right? And that's what's been sort of the firm secret sauce on the US side. I get a new client, I don't really talk much about like any sort of legalities until maybe at least halfway through the call. I talk all about their project, and I'll look at their white paper, I'll look at their deck, and I'll have all of these tech questions. And if I can't like discover it, sometimes we can't solve it. So I do think a dialogue there is important as between the two.
We'll pass that further up. So you first, and then we'll get to Kenton. Yeah.
Hello. So my question is, as a Caymanian, working in if being a founder, or having a director, or having strong involvement in a DAO, what benefits can I bring as being a Caymanian? Like, how can I be like a bridge to like bring people to benefit from the Cayman Islands?
Oh, easy. Do lots and lots of presentations and training sessions and talk about it and talk constantly about it and get people excited and get people really fired up about the opportunity here. Because people like you are the ones who are going to drive the sector forward. Simple as that.
And just one thing to add, I would also give a lot of love and props to those that do that on island, like Mr. Piano, who has endless enthusiasm, for doing stuff and for talking about how great Cayman is, but also how great crypto is.
But more like having that just Caymanian like status, is there any sort of like legal benefit, or like I could benefit more than a foreigner or someone come down to Cayman?
Well, it's cheaper to hire you because you have to do work permits. But also, I do think, so just for context here, I used to live in a Southeast Asian country back in 2012, and I worked with a guy who was an expat, came over, built out quite a successful business. But his key thing from day one was, I don't want to be running this business forever. This country's been gracious enough to host me and allow me to do this. I need to build something up that can then be succeeded as quickly as possible by the people who have let me stay here and build this up and have this opportunity. I think it's incumbent on all of us to bring our skill set to bear, but also bear in mind that we need to have continuity as well. Otherwise, we're going to be doing this when we're 90. And that doesn't make sense for many reasons. But also, if we have this opportunity, we're building up this jurisdiction, I think it's incumbent on us to make that point very clear. But I think it's also incumbent on Caymanians to see what's in front of them, and the paths to get there are so different to what they were before. And to really be able to explore what makes you tick, what you really enjoy, what really kind of makes you passionate, apply that to your understanding of crypto, and then suddenly you're in a prime position for a key role or founding a project here even. Actually, being Caymanian is certainly going to help if you're going to do a lot of a dev here. Economic substance certainly helps if you're doing the IP here. But I think also just building out that community of Caymanians, and there's quite a few of them, and just making that community bigger and louder and more active is, I think, a really important part.
Thank you.
Kenton?
I can't yell.
No, but then it doesn't get caught on the camera.
So if the SEC gets crypto friendly and there's regulatory clarity, do you think maybe there's gonna be less reliance on Cayman foundations, or?
No. Not just.
Tax code.
Yeah.
They'll never fix that. They'll never make it. So it's like, I mean, just think about it. Just think about the Congress. It's like, oh, hey, okay, there's these decentralized digital assets. We get it. Got the security side handled. Well, they put a foundation in the US, no tax. That's right. I mean, and honestly, I think there's other just like practical considerations. I remember when I first got into crypto and I was like, listening to something, I forgot what it was, but it was like, this is a very international, right? Sort of technology. I mean, it is, right? Listen, I'm from the US, like, great. Like it'd be awesome if they can have more economic, things going on in the US, but I don't think it'll ever be that way outside of the securities realm because, again, tax, employment issues. There's just a ton of things, I think, at the US that what crypto is and has become and is continuing to develop into, they need sort of a neutral jurisdiction for what is the biggest part of what houses the protocol, right? Or relates to the protocol as far as foundation.
So a foundation here in crypto would be like a Cayman Master Fund to a US fund.
Exactly. And I think even if the SEC position becomes clearer and they're a bit less medium rare on the whole thing, I think we're going to get to a point, sorry, I had to get that last one in. I think we'll get to a point where we have this discussion of what I think will happen if suddenly the US becomes super crypto friendly. Some great things will happen. One, the labs teams will be able to develop there with confidence. They'll keep the talent there. They'll pay the taxes there. Fantastic. That's how it should be. I still see the governance support vehicles being here because again, it's that international point. They are memberless, and in most countries, Cayman Islands is one of the only jurisdictions which has a corporate vehicle which is not required to have members. It goes completely against the ethos of the entire project and its decentralized governance if you have an ultimate person who can pull out money, shut things down, appoint and remove directors other than pursuant to a professional role as a supervisor. So I do think there is going to continue to be a role for token issuance vehicles, governance support vehicles, and other elements of protocol operations or project operations where the Cayman Islands and the BVI or other jurisdictions are the natural home. Not for any reason of tax evasion or tax avoidance or regulatory evasion, just because it makes sense. And it's a convenient jurisdiction for it, and it's a conducive jurisdiction for it. Government gets it, industry gets it, projects get it. You've got a hopefully homegrown group of people who are going to come through and help support and be involved and found their own projects. But everything is pointing to this being hopefully in place for a long time. Whatever the regulatory positions in the US, UK, elsewhere, that's absolutely the right thing for those countries to do. But as Ryón said, and as we've seen with the funds industry, there is always going to be a place for a neutral structure, particularly given these ultimately are processed everywhere and nowhere in terms of transactions, unless it's a sequencer. But there will need to be a multinational support system for people from all around the world to own and take part in and govern the financial infrastructure of the future. Lots of jurisdictions are going to want to claim that, but ultimately, if it's meant to be for everyone, it needs to be somewhere where it is going to be able to be treated with tax neutrality, with regulatory certainty in that jurisdiction, and then whoever's using it and whoever's benefiting from it and governing it and in charge of it and running it or contributing to it is subject to the laws and regulations and tax requirements of that jurisdiction. So I do think we're in a good place. I think we'll continue to be in a good place, but we can't rest and be on our rest on our toes. We have to be very proactive, constantly evolving with the space, promoting the jurisdiction. And I think if we keep doing that and we keep elevating the quality of the service providers in this space, should be in a good place to serve the technology and what it could achieve for a long time to come. Any more questions? Yes.
What's Puerto Rico doing better than Cayman?
American tax.
Yeah, I think it solves the American tax. I mean, I think you have good tax benefits. This is being recorded. As an Act 60 participant in Puerto Rico, I mean, it is still, a U.S. territory. So it's, I think it's missing a lot of the things that Cayman has. What is it doing right? I think, again, as a place that offers good tax benefits for U.S. people, there is a large concentration over there. Like I've been in crypto for a long time. A lot of my very good friends are over there. I have a 10x greater social life in Puerto Rico. Good guava over there too.
Well done.
Yeah, but yeah. I think it's sort of two different things.
Cool. Any final questions?
Yeah, and I just want to say one thing. If anybody has any questions that are here fermenting, right, want to talk to me about it, we can be your own personal spitzness. I don't know if I said that right. I forgot my Mad Libs until the very end, but I just got them.
Well, I'll get them all in.
Please let me know. Please come talk after the presentation.
Perfect. Been on calls all day. We've been talking a lot, so my voice is running out. So thank you very much, Ryón. Thank you, everyone, for sitting there for an hour.
Thank you, everyone.
Listening without hours.
I completely forgot all my Mad Libs at the end. I was like,
I'll just echo and say thank you so much on behalf of CEC, Horizons Global, Marc and Horizons Law, Ryón, two very separate entities, and to Stepping Stone and Digital Cayman as well. So, yeah, thank you. Have a great night, everyone.
thank you. Thank you.
Does that not sound like an open source software? Oh, yeah. So, tokens are software that's funded in a way, and it wants to deploy.